Hi guys, hi those who just joined. We are going to start in about 1-2 minutes. There's still some people logging in. We're going to give them just a few more minutes before we get started. I'm James Pastor, Program Director here at Clay Arts Center. Thanks for coming. Hey Max, how you doing, bud? Hi Zoe. How you doing?
Hi there.
Thanks for joining. Great.
Nice to see you all.
Let's get started. Welcome. Can everybody see our Clay Arts Center first slide here?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, welcome. So again, I'm James Pastor. I am the program director here at Clay Arts Center. Thanks so much for joining us on this first day of our virtual NCECA. Whoa, who would have ever thought? There's a bunch of new stuff happening, new ways of navigating. So it's going to be an exploration for all of us. But if you don't know about Clay Arts Center, we are in Portchester, New York, sort of suburbs outside of New York City a little bit, metro area, close to Connecticut. And we have a lovely communal studio here in Portchester, resident artist spaces, a thriving artist rental community. We have community arts outreach. We do all kinds of different programming, gallery exhibitions, and we're happy to be participating in NCECA this year. So today we have for all of NCECA, we have lined up a great series of cup demos and giveaways here. And first up, let me get started with some Zoom etiquette, actually, guys. If everyone can make sure they are on mute, that would be wonderful. So please make sure everyone's on mute, and then you should also be in speaker mode on your Zoom settings. Okay, so you have an option between gallery and speaker mode. Please make sure you're on speaker mode and muted, and we'll talk about Q&As and questions in a second. Today we have our first of 3 ways of making cup demos and giveaways with Austin Coudriet, and we're very happy to have Austin. Austin is our 2nd year resident artist here at Clay Arts Center, and before I hand it over to Austin, we have 2 more of our cup demos and giveaways. Tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have Bree Hendricks, our Westchester Fellow, another one of our residents. And then on Saturday, we have our very own, who's I think joining us here today, Zoe, on Saturday, March 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, okay? So they're the ones coming up as well. So I'll hand it over to Austin to get started. And I'm sorry, guys, one more quick thing. As far as questions, this is we're a meeting format. We want this to be conversational, pretty informal, want it to be educational. So please stay muted, again, in speaker mode and muted. But as Austin begins his presentation, feel free to unmute and ask Austin a question during his demo, okay? If you don't feel comfortable unmuting and asking a question, feel free to type your question in the chat bar and I will field that on my end, okay? All right, thanks so much, folks.
Great. Thank you, James, so much, and thank you all for watching and tuning in. Again, happy NCECA, digital NCECA, kind of crazy, but I'm glad we're all here. So once again, my name is Austin Coudriet. I'm the 2nd year resident. A little bit about me. I was born and raised in Lincoln, Nebraska. Got my BFA from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, with a double emphasis in ceramics and sculpture. So I make a lot of sculptures and a lot of pots. Today we're going to be talking about some pots. So I have a few pinch pots here, and I want to talk to you guys about making multiple segment pinch pots. So I have a couple different pinched objects that I'm going to connect and show you guys kind of how I get from this lump of clay to getting a pot like this. So it's nice. It's a really good activity to do, especially in these crazy times when I know a lot of us were kicked out of the studios or kicked out of kind of our place of making and had to work, not kicked out, but had to work from home because of COVID reasons. So I got pretty heavily into pinch pots and kind of away from the wheel. So this is a little bit more of a fancier version of a pinch pot. I have these kind of cloud wings here on the side. I also have a few These ones are more simple. They're a little bit like wine glasses or chalices. The bigger ones could be more even like a dessert bowl. And I have another one here that's bisque, which I'm going to decorate later. And this one just has like a square wing here. I know that the light may be blowing that out a little bit, but we'll talk about that as well. So I have a few different things at different stages. Again, like James said, if you guys have any questions at any point in time, please feel free to either type those in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. I love answering questions. I'm happy to answer any questions about any of the stuff I'm doing right now. If you have questions specifically to the residency or the program, we'll have things later on in the week that kind of address that. But specifically, if you have questions about what I'm doing, I'm happy to answer any of those at any point in time. So I'm going to start out with a chunk of clay. I'm going to be making these shapes first. So for these ones that I showed just a second ago, they all start as pinch pots here. So I have a couple different sizes of pinch pots. I'm going to add feet to these later, so I'll leave those up here. Maybe I'll put them up to the side so you guys can still see them with them out of the way. I also have a couple unrefined ones, so I refine the outside a little bit, so I'll go through that process as well. And then I make a few different types of pinch pots. There's another one that's more of a you-know-me form. So this is more of a you-know-me form, and those ones start out with a base a little bit flatter, kind of like a dish. So these ones are more disc shape, and then this is a coil built on top. The foot's on the bottom there. I have another one of those that has a little bit of a kind of a stem and a foot, and this one too, which we'll be talking about. So we have quite a few things to talk about. I'm going to jump on into those. I'm also going to mention today as well how I got these cloud attachments here. Again, it doesn't have to be cloud. It could be handles. It could be any sort of thing, but that's what I'm going to be talking about. So first thing first, I'm going to start out with some clay. I use an earthenware clay. It's actually from Standard Ceramics. It's number 104. It's earthenware with grog, and it's fired to, I believe it's 06 to cone 4. So these ones are fired at cone 1, but I will be firing, I will bisque them to 004, and then I'll fire into cone 1. So I have about a pound of clay here, maybe a little bit less. And I'm going to start by just pinching out one of these forms. I know it might not seem like anything that crazy or intense, but I think it's a good reminder to start with some basics. I think that I'm going to combine a couple different kind of basic forms here to create something a little bit more interesting. So here's like, you know, a combination that's about to happen. And again, if you guys have any questions about pinching or anything I'm doing, please let me know. So I'm starting out with a ball of clay. I'm pushing my thumb in on the inside. I find that if my thumb is on the inside, things tend to get wider. Things tend to, as I'm pinching, things tend to get wider and kind of expand more. So that might be good for one of these discs, but it's not going to be very conducive for something taller like this cup form here. So I'm actually going to, and I kind of switch back and forth. But if I have my thumb on the outside, I'm able to use my thumb, and instead of pinching the clay, I'm actually going to be able to pull that clay upwards. And again, this is going to be just the method I do it. It's not like if you want it big or if you want it wide, pinch a certain way. You know, I'll kind of switch back and forth a little bit. But the biggest key here is instead of just taking my hand and actually just pinching it, I'm going to take my hand and I'm actually going to pull the clay. And if you're familiar with throwing on the wheel, it's going to be similar to doing like a pull on the wheel. But I'm actually going to just take it and grab it and pull it up. So again, thumb on the inside, thumb on the outside. I switch back and forth a little bit between the two, but as long as you're giving it a pull, I find that's a little bit easier. Hey, James, is that doorbell sound coming from you?
The doorbell sounds when a new person enters the Zoom room.
Oh, okay.
It is, Austin. I wasn't aware everyone could hear that actually, so I can take that off.
Thought it was the front door.
It's our pizza delivery.
So the other thing I will say about pinch pots is sometimes people get a little bit aggressive and they want to do all at once, which is not a bad thing, but sometimes I'll pinch a pot out, and this is pretty rough, but sometimes I'll leave it like this. It's pretty thick, so this is probably close to a 1/4 inch or so, maybe a little bit thinner. But oftentimes I'll pinch a pot and have it kind of set up a little bit thicker. And as it gets a little bit closer to maybe not a leather hard, but like a cheese hard. And if you're not familiar with the term cheese hard, it's kind of just like a block of cheddar cheese. Kind of a funny term. So this is a little bit thicker. I'll probably just leave it out on a plaster slab or in front of a fan for a little bit and come back to it later. But I won't worry about pinching it like paper thin later on. And I'll show you guys a little bit of a close-up of this. So this is what it looks like right now. You can see it's a little bit thicker. It's not very perfect. It's very, very soft. The outside has some pinches. The inside has some pinches. Eventually, I'm going to get to a point where this outside is nice and smooth, and the inside still has some pinch marks. So I'm going to set this aside and move to the foot, and I'll come back to this in a bit. So again, first step, pinching this. I'll also show real quick, this saucer is much easier in my opinion. Pinch. So I'll start out with quite a bit of a smaller piece of clay, maybe 1/4 pound even or less. So pretty small. It's about the size of like a cutie, a little tangerine. And this I'll do a similar thing, but I'll keep my thumb on the inside the whole time. And as I pinch around, I'm just folding my fingers up a little bit to create a disc. And this will even be probably too big. All right, so again, very, very simple at first, not fancy. We're gonna move on to the foot. So this is my foot ring. Again, these are also leather hard, so I'm actually gonna spray these down a bit. So I'm gonna attach some of these here in a few minutes. So I don't want these to get past leather hard when I'm attaching, because that seam becomes very, very vulnerable and fragile at that point. So I just give those a spray. So the foot, you could make a couple ways. You could make it as a pinch pot as well, which I've seen a lot of people do, and I've done it many times. You could also actually attach a chunk of clay onto the base here and then pinch it up around it. I like to have a very stark, kind of like this very stark and crisp line in between. So what I do for mine is actually roll out a coil. So whenever I roll out a coil, if you ever struggle with rolling out a coil, a couple tips I have is one, know the surface you're working on. So I'm working on a wooden surface. I would recommend either working on wooden or any sort of like porous surface. So like plaster is fine, drywall is fine, cement board is fine. Those things will dry out your clay more. I would never recommend rolling a coil on a plastic table or a painted table or something finished. It's just gonna kind of not stick as well. And it's either gonna stick too much or kind of slide right off the table. So there's not really a good even balance between the two. My second tip, yes.
Do you think that the clay that you're using is probably the best kind of clay to use as opposed to porcelain or red stoneware or white stoneware?
So I think that you could do, that's a great question. So for anyone who missed the beginning, I'm using a earthenware, very similar to a terracotta. And I think that it's a really good clay for what I'm doing because of the nature of it. I think a stoneware will be just fine, any sort of stoneware. I think porcelain might be a little bit more tricky on something that has like something that maybe has a little bit of a skinnier base and a wider top and may want to slouch. Or for example, this piece has a lot of weight on the side because of these wings. So if it was porcelain, it might kind of stretch it and warp it a little bit more. I think it's totally doable out of porcelain. I think you could do this out of any clay, but I would probably recommend something with a little bit of grog in it.
Okay.
A little bit of grit. Great question. So I've rolled out this coil, and what I do with all my coils when I'm hand building, when I'm building sculptures, when I'm building pots, is I take them and I just flatten them down with the palm of my hand. So you guys saw that, just kind of flatten down the palm of my hand. I'll flip it over. This does two things. One is compresses it. So as I was rolling it, I was compressing a little bit against the table. And as I'm flattening here, I'm compressing the coil even more. So as I take this coil and start to bend it and twist it up, it's not going to crack at the seams. Sometimes we'll even come back with the rib and compress over that. Don't need to add any water because it's already pretty wet just from me rolling it out. I'm going to cut off this kind of fat end of both slabs, and this will be good for 2 feet. So I'll just make one for the sake of time. So you can do 2 things. One, you can use a banding wheel, Lazy Susan, turntable, pottery wheel, anything that spins to kind of give yourself a nice little round foot there. Or you can just do it on the table. I like to do it on a wheel, just because this wheel in particular has these lines already on it, so it helps me to get a nice and round foot. So what I've done is I've just cut 2 beveled edges. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but they're both beveled, so when they overlap, I have greater surface area. And I'll just take my scoring tool. I like to use this Zeem scoring tool. It's like 6 little needle tools connected. A serrated rib works well as well, but the scoring tool, this scoring tool in particular, lets me score a little bit deeper, a little bit more aggressive, which I personally like a lot. So that's connected. And I'll just take a minute or two to push that down on my wheel here. And as I do that, it's kind of attached itself to this banding wheel. I'll then come back with the metal rib and scrape it a little bit just to take off any big chunks or big bumps from when I pinched it. And I'll come back and reshape that a little bit. So the foot definitely matters a lot when you think about the size of the piece. So if the foot's too small, it's going to wobble and topple over. If it's too big, it's going to seem a little bit out of place. So for example, a piece like this foot's going to be too big. I mean, it looks pretty ridiculous. But for a piece that's maybe going to be one a little bit more like this, it might make more sense to have a wider foot, and I could have a coil up here that branches out some more, or maybe a lower, wider piece. Yeah, again, maybe a lower, wider piece that makes a little bit more sense. So this is a little bit of a thick foot, but it's easier to show you guys a larger piece, I think. So again, take that aside, leave it for later.
Ideally, what's the best thickness of these, or does that depend on the size of the piece?
The best thickness, it definitely is a personal preference. Mine's probably a little under a 1/4 inch, all said and done. So they're a little bit potentially thicker than a thrown pot, depending on how you throw. But it's really up to you. I think pinch pots can be paper thin if you want, and they can also be really kind of thick and heavy and kind of chonky pieces. I think it's completely up to the maker. So, but these are about, I mean, I can show you a close-up kind of the finished version is a little bit, you know, you can see the lip. So it's probably about
Oh,
a fourth
yeah.
inch. You can see my finger. It's relatively thin. They weigh about a pound. So they're a little thicker maybe than like a throne piece this size. But so a really important thing I like to do after I've done the actual pinching method. So when I pinch, they get a little bit, they have all this texture on the outside, and I don't mind that texture, but I like them to be a little bit more refined on the outside and then kind of leave that pinch mark on the inside. So I'll take a piece, for example, this piece has some pinch marks on the outside, put it on my banding wheel, take a metal rib. So I have a few different metal ribs that I use. I think metal ribs are really great. They come in all sizes. So I have, you know, all different kind of sizes of metal ribs. You can get them on any pottery site for really cheap. I think I got some of these at a pottery site for like for $4. I think I got like 15 metal ribs or something crazy. So if you don't have a lot of metal ribs, you can easily get those. And I also take kind of the standard ones that come in pottery kits. So I have like 1,000 of these from undergraduate school, and I take those and I cut them up to get different shapes too. So that's a really great way of getting kind of some free tools. You can take one of these, cut into 3 or 4 different shapes. If you're a wheel thrower, you can cut in some nice marks, and you can actually put that up against your piece as you're throwing and get some nice throwing lines, get some nice texture. Same with slabs. You could do the same thing and get some textures and some slabs. So that's a really great tool at your disposal, very affordable, just to take one of these, which again, you could probably get a pack of like 10 of these for like $2. And you can cut them up to any shape you want. And I cut them up so I can get inside of some of these feet areas to clean up later. So that's kind of a nice little tool there. Have my metal rib, and what I do is I actually scrape the clay. So most of the clay that most of the objects that I make, I scrape them down a little bit. This is gonna get rid of all of the bumped texture and leave me a nice groggy surface, which I'll show you a close-up again in a second. So this clay has quite a bit of grog in it, and it has quite a bit of medium-sized grog. So I wouldn't say it's quite large, but it's large enough that my metal rib is grabbing that grog and pulling it. So I'm getting a lot of these really nice lines. I'll show you guys a closer up version of this. So you can see it's starting to get a little bit rougher. And I'll just take my tool and scratch them up. And this is leather hard, so I'm not really able to, I mean, it's moving a little bit, but it's pretty leather hard, which is a really important step in this process. Is that this is soft. Like if I'm coming to this pinch pot that we just made, I mean, it's not gonna do the same. It's just gonna kind of dent it and squish it and misshape it. So let it stiffen up, come back, scrape it up. For the purpose of the demo, I'm gonna skip forward a little bit here to some attachments. So first thing, pinch. Second thing, let it sit up and scrape it. So I'll typically make quite a few of these. I'll typically make like 6 or 7 of these, maybe up to 10 of these. Not that many, but at a time, just to set them all aside. Then I'll come back to my pieces and kind of assemble them all. So let's jump to that. So I have this bowl piece right here. So it's already scraped on the outside. The inside has that kind of subtle text, subtle imprints of my fingers. And I have this little tiny foot ring that I've also made. So what I'm gonna do first, I'm gonna work all on this banding wheel, and it's a little bit wobbly, so I'm just gonna take my Sureform, knock down the high points. I'm gonna readjust this lip later, but just so it's not so wobbly on me as I'm making, it's just gonna bump off a few of those edges. There we go. So now it's kind of nice and centered there. If you want to, you can even spritz a little tiny bit of water. So if you spritz a little bit of water on a metal surface, whether that's your pottery wheel or if you have a metal banding wheel, you can kind of suction the pot on there so you can get it to stick a little bit better. Then it's kind of nice and centered. It won't move around on me. So now I have this foot piece, and what I'm gonna do is kind of line up how I want it. I can see that I have a gap where the foot meets the pot because the pot is rounded and the foot's nice and flat. So what I'm gonna do is take my knife and just kind of bevel that inwards a little bit. I don't know how well you guys can see this via the camera, but I'm just taking a little bit of an angle so that it matches that inside there. If you are a hand builder or if you're looking
What about a
to
coil? What about a coil instead, or not really?
I'm sorry, a coil for,
The outside or not?
so you
Better
can,
bevel
yeah,
it.
you could definitely use a coil, but the beveling is going to give me a little bit closer surface connection, and it's going to give me more surface touching more surface. So I think it's a little bit of a stronger connection.
Not to
Now, what I'm-
backtrack, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Do you have any tips on how to not have a seam showing? So when I make my bases, it seems like whenever I'm trying to get rid of that seam, it either makes the wall too thin at that point, or it just seems like I can always see my seam.
So if you want like a fluid attachment,
Right, well, yeah. Like when you made the
Sure.
base there, can you see a seam on that, or were you able to get rid of it? Because mine, I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
so when you mean seam, do you mean like a seam in this piece?
Right, so when you made your
Gotcha.
coil and connected them, like mine always seems like I could see the seam that may
Sure.
be hidden when you glaze it, but do you have any tricks?
Yeah, definitely. So are you attaching those right when the clay is super soft, or are you attaching those like from a slab?
No, I usually try to attach it when it's fairly soft so I can work with it better.
Okay. So are you I guess my biggest recommendations would be a longer seam is always better.
Okay,
And I'll show you real quick in this. So let's say that these are your two ends, right? For the sake
Right.
of this, and you want to connect them. So this
Right.
this seam is going to be very weak. I'm not saying you're doing it this way. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But this seam is a very weak seam because it has less connection.
sure,
So
sure.
I'd recommend two things. So one, I would recommend doing a bevel like this. So this
Okay.
alone is going to give you almost twice the amount of connection.
Right,
And then two, bevel it the other way as well, which I can
Okay.
show. So what I'm doing is I'm making a lot of surface area at these pieces now.
I noticed you're not using water. That might be my problem because usually I get it pretty wet.
Sure.
Okay.
So the other thing is I'm also not just connecting them like bare
Right.
minimum here. I'm going to overlap them quite
Okay,
a bit
yeah,
and smush them down. And the thing is, this is it's a little bit of a myth, but you don't actually need to, and take this as a grain of salt, but you don't need to score or slip or add water when you're attaching wet to wet. I mean, it's wet to wet
Right.
is always going to stick as long as you attach it well.
okay.
And then
That's
I
what
can
I'm
come
doing wrong
back
then.
and come back and kind of smooth it up
Right,
and cut it, and it looks, you can't really tell there is a
right,
seam there, right?
right.
So yeah, I
Okay.
recommend using less water. I think scoring is always good. I would always score. There's no point not to score. But
Right, just
you
don't dip it in
oftentimes-
the water.
Yeah, you don't need it. You just don't need
Okay.
it.
All right, thank you.
Yep. And just to clarify, that's for completely green, soft, like super flexible clay. So what I'm doing right now is leather hard. So I've lined this foot up, traced an outline. That's exactly where this foot's going to line up at. Really, really important. I'm taking my scoring tool. I've scored around where that foot goes. Then I took a brush. I like to use a sponge brush of water. Go around and kind of soften those scratch marks. I'm going to take my scoring tool and dig back into the clay. So this is kind of a little bit of another myth. If anyone's having attachment issues or things aren't attaching super well, people often will score and then add some water, or score and add some slip, and stick it together. Now, if you're using slip, that works pretty fine, but if you're just using water, if you score and just kind of get it wet and squish it together, oftentimes the actual action of you getting water on there is smoothing down the scoring marks and just kind of creating a really wet surface, which is not, I mean, it's actually more prone to cracking because you're not actually softening up the clay very much. So this clay is leather hard. And the idea is I want the connection point of this clay and the connection point of this clay to both become not leather hard, to become soft. And so instead of just piling on a bunch of goo and sticking two firm pieces together, that's going to crack later on anyways, because it's not really, the shrinkage doesn't line up that way. What I would recommend is spending a minute or two, and it's a little bit longer than people want to spend, so it's a little bit of patience, but scoring something really well, adding water, scoring back in again, adding water, scoring back in again. And I know that seems like a really pain, but what that does is this. What that does is now creates this nice kind of already slip-like surface. It's actually softens the actual clay, not just the surface, but this actual clay is now softer in both these attachments. I'm gonna put my hand on the inside for support, take my foot, put it on there, and I'm just gonna kind of twist it on a little bit. So I'm gonna go back to my wheel back here. But it's really, another really important thing is you give it a little bit of a twist, a little bit of a kind of shake. And what that means is you think about, you have your scored bottom and your scored top. When you attach it, you attach it. But as you kind of twist it, you're kind of twisting it a little bit further down and locking that into place. If you're ever teaching about slipping and scoring, scratching, attaching, a really great metaphor I like to use is, especially with kids, if you don't slip and score, if you don't scratch and attach, it's like your hands are like this and you can easily just kind of pull them apart. So it's like sticking two pieces together, easily pull apart. As soon as you're scratching and attaching, you're kind of putting your fingers together, interlacing them. It's like Velcro, it's super strong. I know most of you guys probably already know that, but that's something I would recommend. It's just like so important. The other thing is, someone asked earlier, I think it might have been Jane, I don't remember, but about adding a coil. So when I did this, I've actually have added the coil in a sense. So I've squished these two pieces together. I now have all of this goof and slip on both the inside and outside that's squished out. So I'm gonna let this sit up for the next 20 minutes. Again, this won't be for this demo, but I'm gonna let this sit up for the next 20 minutes. And this slip will very quickly become hard and get close to leather hard. As that slip gets leather hard, I'm gonna take my finger and just smooth it in, and it's like a pre-made coil. It's already in there. I don't have to add a coil. I don't have to do anything. The seam will be good to go. And there's some on the inside and the outside, so I can very easily do that. And I'll come back and refine that with the metal rib. So I want to show one more thing. James, do we still have some time?
We do, about 10, 15 more minutes.
Okay, great. Again, if you guys have questions, feel free to either unmute and ask or put it in the chat, and James will read it off to me. So I want to try to show two more quick things. And I'll start with the most important ones. We at least get it out of the way. So after I've attached it, so made this, attached it to this piece. Come back around a little bit closer to the camera for you guys to see this a little bit better. So this is like a me form. The lip is pretty wild. All of my pieces have a hole in the side and the foot here. So what that hole does is actually a functional thing. So when you're washing your dishes, when they're in the dishwasher, you always get that pool of water on the inside. This is actually a drainage hole. So the water drains out. It's kind of funny. I like it as decoration, but it's actually a pretty functional thing. So after you wash your dishes, you don't have a pool of water sitting in the bottom. It's become a little bit more decorational for me as I've gotten into some of these forms, because some of these forms have wings that go up pretty high and they don't really sit upside down very well anyways. So maybe it's less of a functional thing and becomes more of a decorative thing. But if you ever see something in that, oftentimes that's going to be a drainage in a pot. So this is attached. I'll normally come back and scrape it up a little bit more. You guys don't need to see too much more of that, but just to show when you want that kind of refined edge, you can come back with a rib and make that for yourself. And again, this is pretty kind of groggy. So the next thing I'll do is take this rim and kind of even it up. So I'll start by just taking my X-Acto knife, cutting it down roughly the size. You could also use a Sureform cheese grater tool and kind of cut that down. Just gonna mention earlier two tools that as a hand builder I couldn't live without. One, this Zeems scoring tool, and I believe that's XIEM. Yeah, I believe that's what it is. It's faded. This is a really great tool, and then an X-Acto knife. Those are two tools that I couldn't live without when I'm hand building. So if you're interested in hand building, if you've never done it before, if you want to start, those are the tools that I like to use the most. So I first cut that flat, and then the next thing I'll do is I really like two things. I kind of like this cloud attachment cut out in the lip, and I also really pay attention to the lip here. So lip is super important. It's the most intimate part of a pot. It's going to be touching your mouth. It's going to be super important. It's especially in these crazy times of COVID, not a lot of things are interacting with our face in general. So the fact that this is going to come to our lips is a very important detail, a very intimate and kind of sparing thing in these times. So it's very important that lip is considered. So first thing I'm going to do, yeah.
Did you create that lip with just your fingers, or did you use a tool to create that edge?
I'm going to show you right now. Yep, I'm going to show you right now.
Okay. Okay.
So first, I'm just going to cut out a couple little cloud shapes. And on the wheel, I would use a tool. I would use my fingers. I would use a rib to do a beveled edge. But since I'm doing it by hand, I'm going to use a knife. A paring knife works great too. This is a very dull knife. So I have 3 X-Acto knives. I have one that's very sharp because James borrowed it and put a new blade in it. I have this knife, which is probably 3 years old. It's a very dull blade, but I like it because I know that if I slip and cut myself, it's not going to actually cut myself. It's more of like a rib almost. And then I have one that's kind of in between. So I think it's actually, knives are very cheap. X-Acto knives are very cheap. I think it's good to have a couple different hardnesses, so to speak. So I started out by just cutting a couple little cloud shapes.
Leather hard?
This is leather hard, yep.
Okay.
And now I'm going to come back and bevel this edge. So I'm just going to take my knife, come at an angle. And this takes a little bit of practice. I'm kind of using my pinky here as a guide so I don't go too far. And I'm spinning this around. As I get to these cloud forms, cloud cutouts, I'm going to do a similar thing, just kind of follow the form, so go up and around each little cloud bump here. The last thing I want to show you guys today, I want to show you an attachment too. And James, if I'm running low on time, just give me like a 5-minute warning if you can. If I'm already there, let me know too.
Sure, we have 10 more minutes left.
Okay.
Another 5.
Great. So that's beveled. So basically that's going to be a lot nicer of a lip as it comes to my mouth. It's going to fit more so against my top lip there, and the water is going to cut much easier from there. And I don't intend people to drink out of this side. You could, but you'd probably get a little bit of a bath as well. So I would more so intend people to drink out of this other edge here. And I also purposely try to not align the hole with this because I want my pot to be something that people want to look at and kind of turn around and see all sides. So I think this makes me want to spin it a little bit. Then I see a hole, which makes me want to spin it a little bit more. Maybe I have motif on this side. So I'm thinking a little bit about decoration as I get there. Also, kind of the reason why this piece, I know the light is blocking it a little bit, but this piece is blue and yellow on this side. red on this side. It's very different on both sides, but I think that once you see one side, you want to flip it around and it makes you want to spin it a little bit more. So I try to give a little bit of variation. Same with this piece. It has a, whoa, it's really blown out. It has a kind of a yellow glazed dot in the middle. So again, I want people to be able to pick them up and want to see the inside, want to see the underside, etc. So let me show one more thing.
Were those
What do you got?
painted after they were bisque?
Say it one more time.
Were they painted after they were bisque or before?
So they were painted before. So this is the bisque. So I dip it. So typically what I'll do is I'll brush on a thick white slip, which I was gonna do, but I think we're running out of time today. I use one of these bamboo brushes and I brush on a thick, actually a relatively thin layer of slip. And then typically I'll decorate them all before I even bisque them. So I use Amaco underglazes. I use a light red, a yellow, and then I normally slip trail a medium blue, which is what I've got on these grids. So I want to show you guys, that's a great question. You can do it either way. You can do it kind of at any stage with underglazes, but I like to do it at bone dry. Just gotta be a little bit careful because if you add too much color at bone dry or too much liquid at bone dry, it's gonna crack the piece.
And Austin, we have about 5 minutes left, bud. While you finish up, do you mind talking a little bit about which cup will be you'll be finishing up and will be given to the winner, which
Yes.
I'll announce in just a few minutes.
Absolutely. So if you guys don't know, you're currently involved in a raffle. So one of these pieces is going to be given away, and I thought about starting this with maybe saying like, yeah, this piece is going to be a giveaway piece or something, but I decided that it would be maybe a little bit more meaningful if the piece given away was the piece that we demoed with during class or during this workshop. So this is actually going to be the giveaway piece. It's going to have cloud wings like this, and it's going to be decorated. It's going to be a little bit surprised, but it's going to be decorated in this style. So we can't decorate today. There's not enough time to decorate today, but I promise it'll look cool. But this is going to be the piece. So it's going to be one of these types of pieces. It's going to look like this, but have 1 or 2 wings. We'll see how far we get with the wings. And you know, I'll finish it up and we'll ship it out to you guys. So James will take care of that in a few minutes. So I want to talk about the wings. So I'm going to come back and smooth this up later on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this piece above a slab. So I have a slab here, it's pretty soft. I'm going to hold this piece above a slab, and I'm going to eyeball its. I'm going to put it against my leg so it doesn't spin. I'm going to eyeball its silhouette here. So this is not a very formal technique, but I'll show you guys what I'm doing in 1 second. So what I've just done is kind of roughly eyeballed the silhouette of the piece. And that's like a really good trick, because if you hold it above the slab, kind of I close my left eye so I'm really looking straight down on it, and I'm almost drawing its shadow. And oftentimes it actually lands up pretty well with the piece. So this is going to be a cloud wing. Cut out a chunk like this first, set it aside. And now I'm going to just cut a couple clouds into this. So I'll hold this up in 1 second for you guys to see. Just a reminder, there's a lot of events going on this week. I know the Clay Center has a ton of events. If you're interested in seeing more about the events that I am involved with, tomorrow I will be doing a resident artist Q&A with James and Lily. And then Friday I will be doing an artist lecture talking about my work, showing my work, and explaining kind of why I make what I do. I'll also be talking a lot about my sculptural work. I have a new body of work I'm excited to talk about. There's also plenty of demos with other people as well. There's demos all week with cups, which James will cue up again, I'm sure, at the end. But let me just give you a close-up of this before my time here is up. So again, here's that little piece that I cut. That now kind of fits snug against that curve. And And what I do is it's a pretty thick slab. That edge is not something I'm very interested in. So I'm just going to take my fingers and mimic. I'm mimicking the same pinch texture that I did on the actual vessel. And I'm just going to take my fingers, come around, pinch this. What I recommend is the last thing you're going to do is you're going to want to let this sit up and get close to leather hard before you actually attach it, because again, this is leather hard, this is pretty soft. So just to reiterate, this piece is going to be the giveaway piece. So if you're in the Zoom right now, lucky you, you're entered into this giveaway, which James is going to announce here very shortly. I'm going to attach this wing here. And I think I'll attach another one on the side here. So you'll get something like this. It'll look something like this. We'll ship it out to you guys. James, you want to take that? Take that, please.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much, Austin. Yeah, let's wrap it up here, guys. Austin, that was a great job. Thank you so much. I'm super excited to see that cup finished. Well, thanks everybody for joining. So as Austin said, we at random selected our participants, those of you who joined us today, and the lucky person getting the cup is Claudia Fugate. Yes.
Can I say too, if anyone's interested in seeing more of my work as well, my name is Austin Coudriet. My Instagram and website are both just my first and last name. So that's all also probably linked on the Clay Art Center's website, I think. But Austin Coudriet, look that up and you'll be able to find more of my work online as well.
Great. Thanks so much, guys. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Claudia, I'll be reaching out soon. And thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.